So, welcome everybody. It's great to see you all. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. Hi, Chris. Thanks for inviting me to co-host this with you. It's,
No, I greatly appreciate. I said I like conversations more than just one person talking all the time. So as I decided to do this set of Zoom Ask Me Anythings for patrons, I said, well, let's bring other people into the conversation rather than just it being like a lecture or something dry like that. And my friends have different interests. Like we have a lot of overlaps, but we have also some different approaches. I thought that would be instructional to talk about.
absolutely. Yeah, looking forward to it. So, well, I can begin with some questions and you all chance to ask questions anytime. Either raise your hand or pop them in the chat. I think Chris is going to be watching the chat. I can't do that stuff. I can't multitask. I can only multitask if I'm on a synthesizer. Let's see.
That alone is interesting.
Yeah, boy, it's not in my DNA somehow.
Isn't a live synth performance like the ultimate multitask where you have to split your brain off into multiple parts?
I think so, but yeah, in the rest of my life, it's, if you put two things in front of me and ask me to do something, it's like I just tilt. Yeah. So, Chris, get to ask you anything, right?
Yes.
Okay. What's the meaning of life? Oh, well, okay.
That's a good question.
With a simpler one.
The meaning of life is to take what skills we have and to share them with others to make the world a better place.
Awesome. Wow. Okay. Check.
Next.
That was easier than I thought. Okay. That's a good answer, too. Well, looking at the monster, your wall of synths, and also recently listening to your new album, We Only Came to Dream, I'm wondering, how do you take what my friend Bruce Baird and colleague and co-performer, he would, as do I, look at that wall and say, option paralysis. It's like, where do we begin?
Let's turn over to where we can see the monster.
Yes,
there
right?
we go.
I mean, okay, I can't multitask, and also if presented with too many options, I also just game over. So how do you coax music and compositions out of all your...
I put blinders on. I don't approach the modular asking, what are we going to do today? Instead, I have an idea in my head what I'd like to do today. Either pursue a sound or a particular patch, or I started work on a composition. And now I need to start working on the bass sound, the melody sound, the background ambience. And I just pick those off like, okay, today I want a really nice pluck sound for the melody in the song I'm working on. Let's focus on the parts of my instrument that I know are strong at producing that type of sound. And I ignore the rest of it and just start working on those sections. And then I know if I say, oh, it'd be really great if I could also add that then I've got that there to then reach and add in. So I don't look at it and say, what oscillator am I going to do today? I look and said, okay, this is going to be a plucked sound. I've got 3 modules to do plucked sounds. Okay, which one of those has a timbre that's going to work well for this piece? How am I going to double that up with another oscillator? Oh, what do I want, an analog sound like square wave, or maybe something brighter and more digital? And start adding those in. So for me, it makes it easier for me to have all of those choices because I don't get frustrated while composing. I can stay in the flow. I start off by saying, I want this, but then as I start going and going, oh, it'd be really nice to add this in. Oh, what if I want to try this? Then I have the options and I widen my gaze to the other sections of the instrument and say, okay, let's go over there and add that into what I'm doing. But I do think, if I just walked up to it and said, what are we going to do today? I would be paralyzed.
Well, and along those lines, so you go, I want to work on a plucky sound today. And you said, that's what you want to work on because that's what the composition So let's back up one step. How do you know what you're going to compose?
I imagine my pieces in my head first, for the most part, before I approach the synths. Now, let's back up one more step. I do divide my time in between what I call R&D time and then composing time. I do spend at least half my time just playing around. I have some new polysynths. I just got an Ensoniq Fismo the other day, for example. And I will spend time just focusing on that and saying, what will this instrument give me? What sounds does it produce? And then file those away in my head. And the same thing with the modular. I might say, it'd be real interesting to try a patch where I do such and such. And I'll focus on just playing that patch for a day with no composition in mind. But then if something comes out of that, I file it away in my head. Then when it comes time to compose, I start saying, okay, compositionally, what do I want to do? Do I want to do something ambient? Do I want to do something in Berlin school? Do I want to do something that's a little more, soundtracky? And I just literally start imagining the piece in my head first. And then I start pulling from those little drawers, like, okay, I imagine this sound. I've got this technique to pull on to maybe do that sound. I've got this technique to pull on to maybe create this sound or this particular musical passage, and start filling in the composition that way.
Cool. And so, let's see, that engendered the question. Oh, and feel free to all jump in here. So as the composition is taking shape in your mind, in your imagination, is there a narrative? Is there a structure? Or is that free-formed?
Almost every piece of music or art that I do, because I also do mixed media art, is based around an idea or a concept or a storyline or a scenario. I particularly learned when I was doing abstract art that facing a blank canvas is a really scary, paralyzing thing, because a blank canvas is another example of infinite choices. And I found oh, look, I have a book on old folklore. Here's a real interesting story about how coyote brought fire to humans. Let's make this piece of art about that. And then as I make the piece of art, everything I add to the art has to serve that storyline. And I've learned that it's rid of the paralysis of, shall it be green or red? Shall it be a square or a circle? It's like, what's my storyline? And serve that story rather than just being completely abstract about it. And I found the same thing serves me well in compositions. What's this piece going to be about? Now, it just so happens the piece I'm working on right now, I've got a performance coming up October 9th. I was going through some sound effects libraries, and I found some really nice sound effect library from the guy who does free-to-use-sounds.com on Iceland. Really amazing birds, Arctic terns, really amazing rough, rocky surf, and just set a scene in my head. So I said, okay, we're going to do a piece about Iceland. And starting with those samples, now I'm building up a palette of sounds that I think complements those samples and fills out this environment that I'm imagining in my head.
Very cool.
And while doing that, I'm drawing on tricks I had before. Like I have a certain trick I do with a vector to create a harmonic cloud. I'm bringing that in, things like that. I think there was a question, perhaps.
Yeah, this is for either of you, Todd or Chris. With regard to form, if you have if you're starting with a motif or a theme, how do you are you consciously thinking about bringing them back, like a rondo form or something, ABA, or that? What is your thinking process on that? Because sometimes when I listen to this style of music, it sounds almost random. I do sometimes hear themes come back, but they never come back literally. They're always variants and things. And I understand that's the nature of the medium, and I think it's great. But what is your approach to thematic types of approaches?
Todd, do you want to take that first for me?
Go for it, Chris.
My own compositions and my own approach, I do like the arc of starting simple, building layers, reaching something, maybe doing a change in the middle, but I always like then to bring the arc back to the ground and come back to more or less where I started. So that's just a personal favorite approach where I like to take you through a journey, but then back up where we started. Maybe it's where we started, but a day later. Maybe it's after the storm has passed. But I like to have that closure. It's very similar to the opening, and that works for me. Again, it gives me another direction. How am I going to finish this piece? What am I going to do next? Well, I kind of know in my arc, I'm going to build up intensity. I'm going to change my instrumentation. I'm going to come back to where I started again. That works for me doing like 10 to 20 minute compositions. I've been trying to think about what it would be like to try to do either shorter or longer compositions, 5 minutes or an hour. I don't know if that same approach would hold up, but right now that's working for what I'm doing right now. And what about you, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, I rarely anymore work with thematic material. I did for 40 years doing music for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, writing music for, incidental music for, 300 plays. And in that case, the themes are linked up with narratives, and there's lots of different ways to develop them as far as transposing, slowing things down, speeding things up, inverting them, all that. But once I retired there, I found myself just doing mainly free improvisation, which is starting with often a single sound or a timbre or a texture and listening to where it takes me. So each time it's going different, but I am trying to I'm trying to, follow it and develop it and find where it's taking me. And if I really I do go back and look at my performances or my pieces, and they still have, like Chris was saying, an arc to them energetically, maybe not thematically. And I guess from composing for so long and analyzing for so long, when I look back at live performances, I'm amazed that at the golden section, which is 0.618 through just past half, not quite 2/3, there's something usually highly contrasted. And for some reason, I can sense that I'm not aware of it at the time, other than I feel like, oh, okay, I'm getting near the end, and then I end it. But I think in a lot of compositions you find there's something going on at that juncture.
I think you touched on an interesting difference between improv and composition, because particularly before the pandemic, most of my electronic music was based on improvising with others. I had a smaller case I would go bring to other musicians and say, let's improvise. And when I improvise, I had this incentive to keep evolving. But let's go somewhere different. Now let's go somewhere different. Now let's go somewhere different. And I'm perfectly happy if a half hour or an hour later, we're in a completely different place than we started. To me, that's a successful improv, that we went somewhere rather than staying in one groove forever. But when I compose, I'm creating more self-contained worlds, and I'm trying to make the worlds make logical sense.
Yeah. And back to Lance, your question on form, I go on these obsessive things. Lately, I am rereading and finding new literature on everything I can on Edgard Varèse, the great French-American composer, actually. And he talks about form being a process, not a thing. It's not a rondo, it's not a sonata, it's not a sarabande. It's not something that gets filled in. Rather, he likens it to the growth of crystals. Crystals, you know what a crystal is. I mean, we know what crystals are, but they grow, facets grow, and but they grow differently each time. And at the end, you have a crystal that looks different from that one. But so he's saying that the form comes out of the process of building the content, basically.
Cool. Interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks. Does that answer it? Or does that just leave you more confused?
A little of both. I guess that's good. I mean, these things, you don't get an answer. You get, more areas to think about. So I think that's good. Form has always, I guess, I have classical training, so form has always been important. And I don't know if it's so important that you have to stick to these rules. I mean, if you're going to write a piece of music, it's yours. You write how you want to write it. So, but I kind of look at those as more like guidelines, a way to organize your thoughts. What do you want to express? How do you want to say it? Because I think it's important, at least for me, that you kind of have to have parameters. Otherwise, you just create noise. And that's how I'm approaching it for now. Since I'm just a newbie, so I have to be able to recognize what I think is something that sounds good. And form is a part of that. So,
yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Is how much do we take these old rules and how much do we apply them to what we do? One of the great things about modular is that it encourages you to take the path less traveled. On the other hand, if a path is well traveled, it's probably because it's worked for a lot of people in the past. So when I get stuck, I find myself falling back on, what's worked before to get my way out of this. I try to create something new, particularly every time I go to patch, I try to create a sound I haven't patched before. But I also find that just by default, I'm doing the 3-movement symphonic thing, slow, fast, recapitulate. It's just very common for me to follow that form, not because I feel I have to, but it's a great starting point. It's the same thing, and something I think Todd and I are going to get into a little bit later, is even choosing which pitches to play. I like to just go in front of the keyboard and just play, but scales are also a good starting point if I'm lost for thoughts right at a particular point. I'll start with the scale and then start going off that grid and seeing if replacing some of the notes works better for this piece. So yeah, rules are meant to be something in your back pocket to pull on if you need them, but otherwise, make what you want to make.
Mm-hmm. And some guidelines that I've always loved is Jan LaRue. He taught at NYU for years. And his basic thing for composing or how to take a motive and develop it, I think there were 4 things. One was recurrence, which is different than repetition. Repetition would be literal, but like recurrence is, Beethoven, ba-ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-ba-bum. It's different pitch, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. So that's recurrence. Then there's response, which is like almost question answer. Then development, and finally contrast. But those 4 things, recurrence, response, development, and contrast, I use often if I get stuck. It's like, where can I go now? And those I find are broad enough guidelines that they're not telling me what to do per se, but they're sparking something. So hopefully that's helpful.
Now, a compositional problem I've been having myself lately, or a challenge I've been putting to myself, and I'd be curious to get your feedback on this as well, Todd, is when is it time to change? When is it time to change the space or the timbre that you're in? Because I find I do come from a background of very groove-oriented music, and there's a saying, don't lose the dance floor. So there's always someone perched on my shoulder saying, okay, you've been doing this for a while, they're getting bored, put in a change. And this is in contrast to listen to some other people. Steve Roach is one of my mentors, where he can be in a very similar space for an hour. And I don't mind listening to it. And I asked him, I said, how can you stay in that space and not feel this urge to go evolve it or go somewhere else? And his reply was, for him, he starts not with the notes, but with the timbres. He develops a palette of timbres that he really, really likes. And if he really likes those timbres, he doesn't mind living with those for an hour. He doesn't feel the necessity to go somewhere else. And I thought that was an interesting response to my particular conundrum. I'm curious how you feel about evolution in your compositions, Todd.
Yeah, I tend to like to change, possibly faster, or than maybe my audience wants. It's something I continually go. It's like, well, how long can I stay here? But two things are coming to mind. One is like, even Steve Roach, even though he might be in the same general timbre, there's these subtle changes that are going on, and same thing with like Steve Reich, who the patterns, the pulse is the same, but things are going in and out of phase and shifting. It's different rhythms of change. You can have a long thing that's not changing much, but inside there can be this one timbral thing that's shifting at this tempo or rhythm, and then another thing that's shifting at this tempo. And they can line up and interlock. So even on spacious pieces, things that are drawn out, there's still usually a lot of shifting going on. For me, it's a little just more overt, because I will go from one texture, and this is actually back to form. If I start out, I have a patch where on the easel, I touch it and I do not know what I'm going to get. It could be a harsh tone, it could be silence, it could be a little thin tone, or it could be a pulse. And so whatever that is, so if it's a pulse and it's going click, 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 then I can start manipulating that. And usually what I will do is add to it, make it more dense, develop it somehow, and then while that's happening in improvisation land, I'm going like, well, I've sort of taken it to as dense as it can get. Where do I go now? And I'm thinking about that and figuring out how I can make a transition to something contrasting that, which would then be something either slow or something like a wash. And how do I get this, what's now become very rhythmic, into something slow? Is it a jump shift? Is it a long crossfade? Blah, 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 blah. So I guess for me, the textures and what I do lets me know when it's like, either gotten too much, or I've done the opposite. I've done something very, very washy, and it's thinned out to, it's time to change.
Yeah, and for those who are not, for those who are not subscribers to Todd's channel, by the way, he talks about transitions quite a bit. I think that's another important composition. But you touched on another point that is central to what I do, and that has to do with patching. I cannot personally stand a sequence that sounds the same for every loop of the sequence, or even a sound that if I sustained a note, it has gone into a steady state tone. Those are things that I just personally can't deal with. So I purposely patch to have a variation on every note, or for the sound to continue to evolve while I'm sustaining it. That's why a lot of my modular is based on having additional modulation sources, particularly slow random sources or stepped random sources, so that I can have every note of a sequence have a slightly different filter cutoff, or slightly different wavefold depth, or slightly different waveform selection, or whatever. So rather than being repetitive, you can at least listen to it for a while, and even though it's a repeating pattern, it doesn't sound the same every time. I think that keeps interest. And for sustained notes, I particularly love having, and this works for sequences as well, not even LFOs like sine waves or triangles, but chaotic or random smooth sources that always are changing, going somewhere, but evolving themselves as they go. So I can hold one note for a long time, and it will continue to be a different sound from second to second, as opposed to, oh, now what? And when I program the polysynths, in addition to the modular, that's something I'm always trying to work on, is like, I'm holding a chord 3 seconds and it's gotten boring. No, I want it to continue to be an evolving sound. That's an important patch strategy for me for dealing with how do you deal with evolution? When is it time to change?
Yeah. Chris, actually on that point, I really enjoyed your series of videos there on the Ian Fritz, the Chaos modules, because I'm a fan of his stuff too. I've got the Chaotica, I've got the Hypester that he did with Andrew, and my wife, she has the Chakwo, and I thought they were kind of unloved. You know, they don't get a lot of attention, and so I thought it was fantastic when you did that series.
Let me see if I can get this up and working. There we go. I'm going to go over to my synth briefly and just show you my modulation section. There we go. Come on. Oh, it's locked on an image. Come back, camera. Oh, it's not going to work for me.
It was working before. Reboot.
Of course, it works. It works during rehearsal, but it doesn't work, when you actually want to do it for real. It's time to just quit the app and swipe up. Relaunch it, Epicam. Continue the computer. And if not, I'll just describe what I have. There we go. The video feedback we were talking about earlier. Yes, there we go.
Love it.
So I have a Fractals Sapel, which is basically kind of their version of the Buchla source of uncertainty. I have the Mal2 from Sonic Potions, which is another chaotic noise source. The Hypester that we're talking about, its cables patching is same. Just picked up a triple sloth recently. An STV16, which is a pair of LFOs, but they can cross-modulate if I want variety. And then I move on to things like the function generators and the sample holds and stuff like that. But yeah, that's my LFO and random section inside the poncho right there. And there's a lot of Ian Fritz designs in there right now.
Very cool. Thank you for the tour. Oh, back to video feedback.
Yeah, let's try to get some circular pattern. There we go.
Chris, that your wall of synthesizers there, I'm assuming that's the same one you had in Shipwreck?
Yeah, that's the same basic system that was in the piece Shipwrecked, with the addition of a vector synth and a hydra synth. Yeah.
How'd you turn your room blue?
I have in the ceiling 2 sets of track lighting, and each light has an Wi-Fi full RGB LED light in it. And I've got a control panel. In fact, I can even pull it up here.
Oh boy, mood lighting, here we come.
Well, just to show, that gives me control over every light in my studio.
Oh.
So I can go ahead and set them to be, whatever color that I want, et cetera. So in that case, I just picked a palette of lights that were over. Let's see if I can tilt this upward. There we go. You can kind of see the track lighting over it. I could choose a palette of lighting that was the colors that I like. And I also had one of those little party lights, the broadcast stars or the nebula or waves. I had one of those sitting right here off in the corner, projecting up across the modular as well.
And can they all be CV controllable?
No, isn't that a shame? They do all have this early color organ sound input to them, where they will attempt to blink and change based on what the microphone on your phone or whatever is hearing. I've not seen that works very well in performance.
Need some serious disco probably. Drive them.
But I like that. It's something that's happened during the just answering a chat question. something that's happened during the pandemic again is, we used to go out and perform, but now during the pandemic, a lot of us have been performing in our home studios, recording those performances and sharing them that way. And I've seen quite an evolution over the past year, how people have been raising their video game of trying to make the recordings of the performances more interesting. And for me, that was an attempt just to have some mood lighting and things like that.
Yeah. Cool.
It was nice when you could see the shimmering water like superimposed. Oh, that's nice video. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It was two tricks. One, I had one of those little party lights from Amazon that actually does wavy blue lights. And then that piece was based on a story of a shipwreck. And I actually had sound effects of the ocean sound from that location, the shipwreck. And then I went and found some stock footage, a tourist had shot of that actual boat that the sound effect was from, that the surf was from. So I went ahead and bought that stock footage and edited that into the video as well, because that's just an example of thematically, what do I do now? Well, why not have the boat that the sound recording's from in the shot?
So you produced all of it, the video and yourself as well.
Yeah.
Oof. It's a lot of work.
I started out in music. I worked for companies like Sequential and Digital Design and Roland for several years. Then I got into the video and film industry and worked for about 20 years doing opening titles for TV shows, films, corporate events, things like that. And now I'm back doing music, but I have that video background I can draw on, and that's been handy.
I have a question on, with regard to specific pieces that you write, and if you perform them live or recordings, I don't know, but I'm assuming that most of this, there's no notation for this, right? Nothing's written down, right? So if you perform, how true to, you know what I'm asking, right? Like, how same is it all the time?
I do actually write down a fair amount. I'll actually write out, I'm backing up further, I'm using the Todd's earlier prompt, backing up further. Quite often when I'm picking a piece, I'll start with something like a sound effect. And if it's church bells, what's the pitch of those church bells? Okay, what key is that? And I'll start writing out bass lines and melodies based on that. And then I'll program them into the sequencer. So I do keep a list of notes of patches, waves that I use, notes that I use, things like that. And then when I compose a piece, I do think of it as very sectionally. I first create a palette of sounds that I really like together that I'm going to improvise for several days. I'm trying different combinations of those sounds to see what works together well. Then I work out an arrangement. Okay, let's go from this combination to this combination to this combination to this combination of sounds. And I'll quite often write out for myself a cheat sheet saying what those combinations are and any important knob settings I have to not forget when I go between them. But then when I'm performing a piece, I'm sitting in each of those sections for as long as I want and improvising each of those sections. So it's not a written out melody, here's a solo I have to play. It's just like, okay, I'm in this space now. Let's tweak the filter. Let's play these notes on the pad. Let's go play this now. Okay, feels like it's time to go to the next section. What are my notes? Okay, that's this combination. Let's make sure we change that. Go to the next section. Then I improvise inside that section for a while. And so far, I'm still in the habit of performing pieces straight through live. Now, I'll record multiple takes and then keep the video of the one take that I was happiest with. And each one will have subtle variations. And sometimes, like my favorite take, I overdrove the bass and it's all distorted. But if it was a sequence, I can go back to another take and say, let's pull that sequence, plop it in here if it was better recorded, because it was something that wasn't changing. But currently, I'm pretty much performing straight through and then picking the best of a handful of different performances of the piece, each with improvised sections inside of them. I see that changing in the future where I'll start doing more overdubs. I'm making a point of recording everything into Ableton Live now, where Ableton is my tempo master, and it creates a grid for everything. So all the notes coming from the sequencer, any notes that I'm playing over MIDI get recorded into it and put onto this timing grid. So I can go back later, play back the piece in live, and it's going to put out a clock that's in time with the original performance. And then I can go ahead and overdub additional keyboard parts or whatever. Haven't done that yet, but I expect to eventually get there. I'm working on a piece for October 9th that's by necessity. I'm playing it live in person, so I'm not going to bring the monster. I'm just going to bring my gigging case and a couple other pieces of gear. But when I create a version of that song for the album, I know I'm going to want to add some keyboard overdubs to it. So I'll record a version of it here in Ableton Live and come back and overdub that later. Todd, do you do any overdubbing, or is all your pieces straight through recordings of your performances?
Yeah, there's two different ways. I mean, my album Multum in Parvo was go out to the studio and turn on the computer and play for 50 minutes, basically. It was a complete free improv. That said, I'd been doing that every day for a couple of weeks. So one day it really worked. That's the one I kept. And then when I do albums, I record pretty much everything I do every day. And I try to make it sort of as musical as possible. But, sometimes it just crashes and burns, but there's maybe parts of it. So when the album I did Spaces, and I'm starting to work on another album now, is I will go sit down and take a week and listen to things I've recorded for like maybe a month, that's a lot of hours. And as I'm doing it, I'm curating them. They're going into folders. And as that second round goes, along the way, I've gone, oh yeah, that I think will go with this, with that. And I start, the curation process just keeps focusing down until I basically have my palette, if you will. And then I not so much overdubbing, but it's then a matter of layering and finding transitions. And then that also, once, that starts to take shape, like the crystal metaphor, then I go, I really need some sort of low sound. So then I start creating stuff to go with it. Or, I need a tone that is going to take 3 minutes to climb 8 octaves, And so I go create that, drop it in and see if it works. And if it doesn't, then, keep moving on. Yeah.
I was going to ask whether or not you were thinking in terms of layering or just putting things in lines. It was interesting that you also layer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first Alias Zone album I released from 2000 was me doing improv with a group of other musicians. And each one of those pieces was about a 20-minute live jam. And I cut each one of those down to, what's the 5, 6, 7 minutes of this that was really good. David Torn famously had a song on one of his albums called 3 Minutes of Sheer Entertainment. It was an 11-minute long song.
On what time scale?
Yeah. But then I'd say, is there a piece missing? Oh, I could use one more rhythmic track. How do we get into this piece? Maybe I need a particular sound environment to get into the piece. And that's how I'll do that. So that's how the first album was created, was taking long improvs and cutting them up. But lately I got so used to just playing live. I'm in this mentality of you have to play the piece all the way through. And I guess that's its own interesting limitation. I'm hitting my head against that for this performance I'm going to do on October 9th here in Albuquerque, because I'm weighing how much gear I'm willing to bring with me to this site versus, I really would like to have another part here. Do I want to bring another instrument?
Chris, I had a question. When you guys have a jam, what kind of how do you start that? Is there a set of rules? Like, you guys discuss meters or keys, or like you just jump in and play whatever, or how does that work?
quite often with the people I play with, there's one person has an idea. We'll start playing that idea, and the rest of us will jump in and add on top of that. When I played with Cosmic Debris back in LA in the late 90s, early 2000s, quite often I was the person who would set an environment. Hi, Stu. Where I would start with an ambient recording and I'd start with a rhythm. And since I was the drummer in that particular band, I didn't have to worry about musical keys. I left it to the other players who were very good musicians to where the keyboards would start playing a line. And then the flautist would look over and say, what keys are you playing? And start playing an improv based on that. And then pieces would grow organically from there. Now when I play with a Meridian Zone, which is a Jim Coker, a 512, and occasionally Jason Fink, usually one of us has an idea, like Jim has a sequence he's pre-programmed, and he'll say, this is in, F sharp Dorian or whatever. Okay, now the guitarist knows what scale to play in. We are sharing clocks, so we're all locked into the same tempo. And I have this kind of cheat sheet built into my sample library. I have a sample library of different rhythmic loops, everywhere from like drummers to percussion to industrial sounds, but they're all in folders in 5 beat per minute increments. And so whenever I see a tempo coming in, oh, this one's at 93, let's go look in the 95 BPM folder and see what might work with this piece while we're playing. So it's usually one person starts and the rest of us organically grows on top of that idea.
Yeah. That's true for most of the jams I've been part of too. It's whoever starts first. So, and we don't occasionally. And we don't even say that. It's like, we don't go, you start. Mm-mm.
Yeah, and if you're in a good environment with people who get along with each other, that works great. I've been in bad band situations where like one musician may decide, I don't like where we are. I'm going to purposely try to sabotage it. And like start hitting the same chord repetitively, but out of tempo and out of key and things like that, just trying to force us to change out of that space. Those are people you don't try to play with.
Cool. Okay, moving right along. Are there other questions out there, by the way? Did you get one in the chat, Chris?
Someone had to head off, and I just wanted to say hi.
Oh, okay.
I've got a question. I apologize for being late, but nice. Thanks for doing this, Chris and Todd. It's nice to talk to you. My name's Stu, and I apologize if this has been asked and answered already. I just wondered what you've got coming up, what's exciting to you on the horizon, personally, musically.
Yeah, I really want to do another album or two by the end of the winter. That's my focus in life right now. Is getting, as a lot of you know, I broke a leg a couple months ago, and it's greatly reduced my mobility and my ability to use my studio. I'm regaining that. I get to start putting weight on the leg in a week. Hopefully I'll even be starting to walk again in a few weeks. That'd be fantastic. But I've been using that time to go ahead and go around and organize the studio and bits of it, and start working on some ideas and gathering sound effects libraries together to get all this raw material ready to start working on albums. And then an opportunity that I actually canceled because of the broken leg and I've put back on my schedule is I'm going to go ahead and play at New Mexico Control Voltage, which is our modular group here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, on October 9th. And that's going to be exciting for me because I haven't played out physically since NAMM 2 years ago, before the pandemic. So I've really evolved what my personal gigging system is. I'm adding a couple instruments to bring with the gigging system. Fortunately, a couple guys are offering to be roadies to carry the gear because I'll be barely walking at that point. So I'm composing a piece for that with the idea of how does this fit into some other stuff I'm going to be doing for an album. And I really want to work on some album material. The other thing it's going to be fun is I've got my wife is Irish, and we're both Irish-American dual citizens. I'm going to go to Dublin, leg willing, the end of October, early November. And the Dublin Modular is having a couple meetings first weekend in November. I'm going to be attending those meetings as well. That's going to be fun. But for me right now, I'm kind of in this mode of I'm kind of limited between my lack of mobility and the pandemic to play with other people out live. So I'm focusing on let's get some ideas together in my head and do a couple albums of cohesive material and try to get those out by the end of the winter.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. And sure. I'll ask Todd the same question. Curious.
Yeah, I'm actually have an album that's just in its nascence. I've written the first piece, and it was I'm sure we're always trying to, or at least I'm trying to find new vocabulary, always push my own personal envelope. And in the past, most of what I have done is like maybe it's all Easel or all Buchla on the album, or all Serge, or all Hordijk albums, or maybe there's a little cross-pollination, but not much. But a couple weeks ago, I just, for whatever reason, discovered this newer vocabulary for myself, which is using, I had hooked up the Easel and the Serge paperface, which I'd never done before. I usually keep them separate for whatever reason. I guess because I think of them as instruments. It's like, here's a violin and, here's a guitar. Oh, wait, you can patch chord those together? Okay. But I did with the Easel and the Serge, and again, was recording a lot of material. And it's also down in the basement studio with a piano, so prepared piano. So I was recording prepared piano, Serge, Easel, Waterphone. I don't know if you've seen those. It's another sort of like a handheld acoustical synthesizer. It's I can run and get one, but and lots of other things. And then I started to put them together in Logic. I started that whole process, and all of a sudden something just, it really opened up for me. I also was going back to a program that I did a lot with when it first came out. It's called Meta Synth, METASYNTH. It's, you actually can, move your mouse around and draw things on the screen, and it will play it back to you. Basically, it's, what is it, 1,000?
Waveform?
Well, it's, each pixel can be its own oscillator, so you have like 1,000 oscillators. I mean, it does.
Wow.
You can do fast Fourier transforms and have those played back. What I do is take musical gestures, like I would take piano gestures, and it will play that, it will actually resynthesize it into nothing but sine waves. It sounds just like what I did, but then I can just like take that gesture and slow it down like 10 times and blur everything out and have it played back by strings or played back by other samples I've made. So there's this cohesion that I was finding in all the gestures at the beginning. They continue, but they're so abstracted, I doubt that you would know that they are the same gestures. But anyway, that's what I've been obsessing with. And I'm going, okay, now I'd like to, with this newfound way through sound, put together an album.
That's great.
I was going to ask you about that myself, actually, Todd, because I was curious to compare our different approaches. Is that it seemed like up until now, you had focused on these more or less self-contained instruments, even if they were patchable. The Serge, the Buchla Easel, your Hordijk system, you have the Steiner Parker synthesis system. And I know that my own approach to modular has always been mix and match, because I wanted to create new things. And even when it comes to keyboards, it's like each one can do something different as opposed to picking a cohesive family of keyboards. So I was going to ask you about, why did you approach things that way? I guess it's because you do think of them as individual instruments and you want to really see what that instrument gives you, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, the Easel's the core. It's the one I've spent the most time with. And I've I still have not found the edge, the very end of it. And it's been a lot, because I think learning one thing really, really, really deeply actually opens things up when you go elsewhere. Like, even though it might be a different paradigm, just the time spent and going deeper and asking more questions of, well, have I tried this? Or what happens if, yeah, okay, what happens if we take all 23 sliders to 10, you know, and then work backwards from there, like just starting pulling sliders. I mean, there's still things I haven't tried. So, yeah, I came from an acoustical, you know, I was trained classically and jazz in trumpet, and then I went over to early music on recorder and Baroque trumpet, and played in jazz bands and orchestras all through high school and college and afterwards, and you know, toured as a soloist and in ensembles. So, you know, with trumpet, you know, I put in 15 years, you know, 5 to 6 hours a day. You're practicing and keeping the chops up. So the idea of spending that much time with a single instrument like an easel is sort of what I've done all my life.
So you spend a lot of time with Easel approaching and saying, you know, what can you do? Let's go find your edges. And it sounds like. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm.
Sorry, I was going to say, speaking of Easel, I was just at NobCon and Buchla had their new iteration on display, not yet for sale. Just wondering if I suspect the answer is yes. If you've seen it, if you have thoughts on it, you're probably involved to some degree.
Well, but, yeah, I mean, when they were developing some of it, I was, you know, consulted, but I haven't seen the actual physical one until I saw the photos at NobCon. But no, I think they've really done a good job. I love the new keyboard with actually a ribbon controller, which was like on one of the early, I think it was the 214 that Don designed. And when Bemi came out back in 2012, and they were doing the design, I got in just, you know, near the end, and they were saying, well, should we include slope, which is on the original? It's a banana jack that is, you know, gives you some, it's like a slew. And I was going, yes, absolutely, you've got to have that. And they said, oh, we don't have room. So I was very disappointed in 2012 but I saw that slope came back. It's on the new 218. And, you know, the 208C, lots of, you know, great features on that already. And then their little patch memory, which I understand, I believe, will also work with like the larger 200E systems. So, I mean, it's all in the same sort of architecture, I believe, as far as hardware programming stuff that I don't understand. But
I was going to ask, what are the differences between the old one and this brand new one? So the patch memory, the addition of slope, and a few other.
Yeah, and then there's also some
the ribbon.
There's like the equivalent of like Serge slew, negative and positive slew on part of that patch memory thing. There's all sorts of, and you know, he looks like outputs for gate and CV for Eurorack. I know that it's also on the back of a 208C, but I saw that in there. Also, MIDI, it's like every version of MIDI, which I don't do. But you know, I saw like USB and other things. So, yeah, it looks like it has a lot of flexibility. So, yeah.
Cool.
I'd like to get my hands on one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Most welcome, Stu. Yeah.
Any other questions you had prepared for me? Like you already asked what is life. Please don't ask me what is death. I haven't thought that one through yet.
Okay. What was the? Yeah, there's. I forgot where I heard this a couple weeks ago. It's like life, death, and music is everything in between.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so when you approach these, do you patch from zero, or do you take a patch and like really develop it over days and weeks?
Yeah, most of the time I'm patching from zero. Like virtually all of the cables come out of the modular, particularly the Monster modular. There are some things I keep pre-patched, like the audio output section of the modular, just because I need to get all of the mixers onto the umbilicals that go off to the computer. That stays in place. I have a lot of patching through a chain that allows me to tune and transpose my oscillators before it goes to each sound source. I leave that intact. And the gigging system, I've got some sync stuff and things like that that are pre-patched. But other than that, I pull out the cables and start from scratch every piece. Because even though there's some things I fall back on that I do quite a bit, like a bass sound always has an analog oscillator and a digital oscillator, blah, blah, blah. I just like to approach each one as like, this one's going to be different. You know, I really kind of feel this, I don't know if obligation is the right word, but you know, for me, the reason to use a modular rather than a pre-patched instrument is so that it can be different. And therefore, I feel I put this personal burden on myself that every time I approach it, I want to create a new sound because that's what the instrument can do. And so therefore, I tend to patch from scratch each time.
Great. Yeah. Likewise. I mean,
Chris, you know, in your basic course, you said that you color coded your cables to tasks. Is that a practice that you designed for like the course, or is that what you do all the time?
It was originally designed for the course because I wanted people to be able to glance at the video or a photo and get an idea of what was going on. You know, oh, yellow cables are carrying audio, blue cables are carrying modulation, to make it easier to decipher a patch by looking at it. But it is a habit I have kept up now when I'm patching both the portable gigging system and the big Monster modular, is I will still do that when I'm patching because it just helps me sort things out. I've taken it to, I'm trying to take it to another extreme because particularly with the big Monster modular, I may have 4 or 5 voices going at one time. So there's a lot of patch cables, including ones of the same color. So I've been purposely trying to add colored wire ties in a different combination to each patch cord. So I can go, okay, on this modulation source is this, you know, blue cord with a yellow and green zip tie. Oh, it's going to this module. Thank you. Rather than having to go like through the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Actually, along those lines, this was another question I wanted to ask. In Patch and Tweak, which awesome book. And
thank you.
What great writing. Still go back to that all the time. And I love the sort of patch language that you were creating. And I realized, I worked with that for a while. I haven't, but I was wondering how that's going. There was going to be an online repository for people wanting to work that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, a real challenge when you're trying to write a book on modular synths is how do you tell people how to do a patch? Because everyone has a different collection of modules. So you couldn't say, here's the front panel of a Mother 32, turn the knobs to these positions. People are going to have different oscillators and filters. So an early problem that Kim and I tackled in the book was, how are we going to represent patches? Because Kim in particular really wanted to have patches in the book. And I remembered back in the 60s and 70s, people like Alan Strange and Richard Bugg, a musician friend of mine, and others were making attempts at coming up with a universal patch language. In Beaver and Krause's original non-such multi-album thing on electronic music, they used a symbol language that they created as well and used it throughout the notes of teaching electronic music in that thing. So I knew people had tried it in the past and then kind of gave up on it when preset synthesizers became available. But I said, we have to revive this. So I started pretty much with the system that Richard Bugg had come up with in Polyphony magazine for Paya and other manufacturers, and then looked at other systems like the Alan Strange system and the Beaver and Krause system to see what to add on to it. And we said, okay, let's try to make this universal patch language that's abstracted work. It's not going to tell you how to use a very unique module like a make noise morphology or like a Buchla source of uncertainty. But I can break out the components of a source of uncertainty to a step random voltage, a smooth random voltage, things like that, and at least represent the building blocks of it in that language. And up on the Patch and Tweak website, there is a repository of all of the graphics that we use that anyone can go ahead and download and reuse. And a few manufacturers have been doing that for their own manuals and things like that. We have been trying to come up with a patch librarian that's online. And Kim's worked with a couple different programmers and there's a beta of a patch, click and drag patch interface on the website where you can go ahead and store your own patches. And I will go ahead and use that page myself whenever I'm illustrating an article. But we're having trouble finding a developer who will take it and run with that idea and make it a sturdy app that everyone can have access to rather than being a beta web app. But the idea was, how do you represent a patch to someone where everyone's going to have a different module? And that's why we developed the language in the first place. And the symbols are available, and I'm happy a lot of people have been using them.
That's great. Yeah, I was super excited when that came out. So glad to know it's alive and well.
Yeah, if you look at front panels of like the ARP 2600, Core Gamma series, things like that, they were using a lot of those very basic symbols even back then on their front panels to show you how things interconnected.
Yeah. Unlike the Serge paper face.
It's interesting talking to Serge. Serge has become a good friend. And when I approached him, I wanted him to be one of the interview subjects in Patch and Tweak, and he refused. And what Serge said was, oh, no one cares anymore. It's all too confusing, so just don't bother. And I had to really convince Serge, this was a few years ago, that people are still using your systems. People are still intensely interested in your systems. And that was the start of a really fun conversation. I at least got to put up on my website with our conversations over time about his approaches to synthesis. But he wanted to have a system where it wasn't reliant on English language speakers, for example, to understand what the front panel said. He wanted something that didn't use language and just use symbols to go ahead and lead people around. But he only did that for the first generation of his instruments and kind of gave up and started using normal English language symbols and stuff like that. But Serge also had an approach of, he really felt that he was creating like the raw tools and it was up to see what musicians did with them. Particularly, I asked him on like the peak and trough generator, the one that detects whether or not voltages are going up or down or holding steady. I said, so what was the idea behind that? Why did you make that? He said, because I knew how to do the circuit. And I wanted to see what a musician would come up with and do with it.
That's great. Yeah. I think, to a certain extent, Don Buchla, who, Serge had worked with, was of the same thing. He didn't want to be proscriptive. He just wanted to give musicians tools. That's why there's no manuals. Basically.
I had some interesting conversations with Serge about that because Serge was hired by Morton Sabodnik to maintain his Buchla system. And all he got was schematics, no manual. And that's how Serge learned a lot about how synthesizer circuitry worked and things like that. But Serge, diverged a lot from Don. The early systems are one thing, but then they kind of diverged, where you can argue that Don Buchla was making a lot of self-contained semi-modular pieces. A lot of things like his complex oscillator are a couple oscillators, a ring mod, a VCA, wave holder, all behind one panel with pre-patched settings. Same with his spectral processors and other things like that, the sources of uncertainty. So he's kind of like we were comparing it to computer languages of CISC, complex instruction set, and RISC, reduced instruction set. Mm-hmm. And Serge felt Don Buchla had gone to the complex instruction set of, here's a complex oscillator, here's the source of uncertainty, here's the spectral processor, which are several modules behind one panel pre-patched to do something. And Serge really wanted to take the RISC, the reduced instruction set, where like, here's a level detector and here's a slew and patch them together to make an oscillator. Yeah.
Right. However, his dual universal slope generator turned out to be something that, it can be 10 different things, from filter to oscillator to subharmonic generator to you name it.
Yeah, exactly. And that was his idea, was here's the building blocks. What all can you do with those building blocks?
Yeah. Love it. Great.
We've been going for a little while. Anyone have any remaining questions they want to ask Todd or myself before we enjoy the rest of our Sundays?
Hey, what is your approach to stereo? Because I'm always trying to up the stereo and even expand into quad.
Yes, I agree with you. We should, I think, particularly a year or two ago, I think a lot of musicians ignored the stereo field, particularly when it came to modulars. Because back then, a lot of them had monophonic outputs, so they just placed them dead center or hard panned them somewhere and just left it alone. And I really work on making the stereo field interesting. I really think that's an important part of it. I haven't gotten into quad myself. I know that's something people are going to. A dear friend of mine, Richard Bugg, works for the level control system wing of Meyer Sound Labs, who does these multi-speaker installations. And whenever I go play with Richard in LA, he brings his van with multiple Meyer systems and the full circular sound setup and all that. So it's really kind of fun. But I really believe that the stereo field is something that's underexplored, particularly by modular synthesis. I'm glad to see there's more stereo output oscillators, more stereo filters. It's easy to do a stereo VCA. And when I'm creating a patch, I'm thinking a lot about how am I going to make this thing not just be positioned in the stereo field, but move around and fill the stereo field. I will do some of my fallback patches are either having a slow random source patched to the pan of something, and I'll constrain, just how wide of a pan it will go, but I'll have it going in a particular area and maybe a second line off to the side. So the two kind of touch, intertwine and go in and out of each other. Quite often I will go ahead and have a new note event also trigger a sample and hold, and have that then set the pan position. So every note there's a very pointillistic appearance at a different point in the stereo plane. And I love stereo modules where I can go ahead and get them. So I'll go ahead and pan those hard just to go ahead and get a nice wide stereo field. And something I'm doing, I'm just chewing up channels on this system I'm putting together over there. I'll bring up on the camera here in a second if I can get a chair out of the way. I'm wanting to do more stereo. So I have this sound that's like a very low, detuned, deformed cymbal sound, but it was just right here in the stereo field. I couldn't take that. So I've added another effects aid to that case with a stereo chorus unit, just because I wanted the sound to envelope you rather than just being a point source sound. I really like music being an environment that you inhabit rather than it being, here's a sound, here's a sound, here's a sound.
Yeah.
Todd, you play with multi-channel sound.
Yeah, quad's sort of my go-to thing. Because I love the spaciousness and the various ways that can go. Stereo, I grew up on music concrete as a teenager, so I love hard panned, jumpy stuff. So what I've been doing lately is I have in the Eurorack system, which is what I used to take my Easel and go into stereo, go through a planner to the IntelliGel, and the planner then goes into my looper and then into reverb. And I can take a sound and slowly pan it, and that gets looped. And then my next pass, because I used looper a lot in my live performances, it's a completely new sound and texture is now doing this. And it just got layered to that, right? So, and then I can do something percussive and ramp up the panning speed so that the are totally ping-ponging. And I discovered these in live performance, which is sort of nice because it's out of phase and I can tell I'm getting close, and it's just a knob turn to it locks. So now we have three completely different panning gestures. going on simultaneously. So that's where, and the other thing is I am able to ramp up, it's an old Stockhausen, Morton Subotnick thing, is I ramp up the panning to audio rate. So I actually can get extra pitch out of what's going on.
That's fun. Yeah, when I was experimenting a bit with Richard Bugg about, he really wants to take what I do when I'm playing with him, quad. I tend to do a lot of percussion. And we found some various things work or don't work. Like sometimes I'll go ahead and bring up a loop of a drummer. And we found that having a drummer panning around the room was really disorienting. So we found that it was useful to have things that you expect to be fixed, like a person playing a drum kit, fixed in the front of the room. But then we were playing with ideas of having other components, like other individual percussion lines panning around the room. So I would have a percussion line where I would have a sample and hold, giving it a random stereo position on every hit, give that a wedge of space, say 90 degrees, and then we auto pan that around the space. So rather than just being one sound going around your head, it was like doot, 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 bouncing back and forth left and right while the general motion was around your head, but it didn't keep a steady motion. It would go back, go forward again, etc. And that worked out very well.
Yeah. Good question,
Great
Bill.
to hear the insights of the two guru teachers here. I appreciate it.
No problem. I've been spending more time programming polysynths as well, and I've been really working on stereo panning in those as well. I like it when it can randomize where the voices are for every note of the chord. And I've really been working applying individual modulation to the stereo position of each of the oscillators. ASM just released the HydroSynth Deluxe, the HydroSynth Mini, and I did some of the patches for that. And virtually all of my patches have a separate LFO for each of the stereo oscillators, panning them randomly. So even while I'm holding a chord, there's motion inside the sound in the stereo field. Just because it's back to what I said earlier, I don't want to hold a chord and go, there it is, we're holding an organ note. I wanted to have life, while sustaining the same notes.
That's great.
Just in terms of spatiality there, I noticed that at Superbooth, and I don't remember the manufacturer, but there's a binaural mixing module available in Euro now. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, I certainly have nothing against binaural, but I thought it was a very sort of specific choice that you'd have a module dedicated to that. And
yeah, you'll find that a lot of modules are created because someone has a piece of technology and they want to do something with it. That's the impetus behind a lot of modules. But think about it, particularly during the pandemic, a lot of us consume music wearing headphones. I've got my AirPods in right now, for example. I do a lot of my work with headphones on. So I think it's not an unwise choice to say a lot of your audience, if you try to distribute your music, are probably hearing it on headphones. And then let's give them a great experience.
Good point.
I guess ambisonic is the next one.
Yeah, when I like to do field recordings as well. When I was getting another latest Zoom field recorder, and this all ties in. I immediately got the MS, the mid-side mic capsule for it, so I could decide what the stereo field was for each of my sounds. But also, I was looking at getting the ambisonic capsule for one of them as well. And a friend of mine, Michael Stearns, just lives up in Santa Fe, an hour north of me. He's really into ambisonic recordings and stuff like that. And I intend to take a trip up to the studio and talk to him about that as well.
Very cool. Wonderful. Well, did we do it?
I think this might be it. It's certainly been some pleasant conversations. I've had these always go unexpected places, and that's great.
It's great to see you, Bill and Dan, and meet you, Stu and Lance and Dirk, who has is that a Smurf? Dirk?
That's a Smurf.
Very good. Okay.
That's a Smurf on a verbose. Yeah.
The Smurf takes me back. Yeah.
Smurfos.
Yes, it's. I'm always cooking. Eh?
Nice. Nice.
I just want to try to see your Smurf. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. You've got the good grandpa Smurf beard.
Yeah. I'm Belgium, so I have to have my honors up.
Whoa. Okay. So yeah, it's like 9:30 or
Know where
something.
that is?
So where?
Know where that is? Belgium?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was there
You do.
last year. Played in Brussels.
I'm Brussels, okay.
I have family members who live in The Hague, so I come to that part of Europe quite often.
No, that's Holland.
Yeah.
I know it
That's
is Holland, but
outside of
it's adjacent to you, so it's fun to come over. There's lots of great things in the area, a lot of great electronic music labs
Yeah, I
and things
know.
like that as well.
It's vivid, it's alive, I know. Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
so
fantastic.
far away.
Yeah,
just wanted
I think,
to
you know,
ask you, Todd, I have a question for you.
Oh,
Why don't
okay.
you use MIDI?
Because
I
I
do.
did for like 30 years.
And still hate it, or what?
Well, it was great for what I was doing because I was having to produce a lot of music very quickly and using sample libraries and able to perform all the parts. I like that. But for me, I feel detached because there's code between me and the trigger. And I'm way too deep now into pressure, like coming off the easel. And I like knobs. I know I could map knobs in MIDI and all that stuff, but I feel like I'm closer to the electrons without it, is this quick answer.
I personally don't
Yeah,
use it either.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually I was technical chairman of the MIDI Manufacturers Association for years, so you can blame me for some of your complaints about MIDI. But I still use it for clock. It's great for sending utility messages around the studio, clocks, and I use soft control surfaces to remotely mix what's going on because I'm using my computer as my mixer. So MIDI is great for doing that sort of stuff. But something I just brought up with my patrons recently is, I've played around with layering my modular synth and my polysynths as well. Because, for example, the sequencer I use, the 512 vector, sends out CV gate and MIDI. And I can go ahead and have it send it to one sequence, go to multiple outputs on it. And I will sometimes have like the Korg wave station do a wash backing up a pointillistic sequence that I'm doing on the modular. And I'm enjoying that sort of layering. So, I'll use MIDI sparingly to get a job done.
There
Okay.
you go. Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks so much for doing that. I mean, for having this, Chris, and for having me to co-host with you. It's been a blast.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Great to see you all. Good to see you, Bill. And as I say, Bill and Dan. And who's next to you, Bill? I didn't hear it, but you're okay. Anyway. Good to see you. Okay.
Okay.
Lance, Stu.
Have a nice evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Chris,
you.
Todd. Have a great
Bye-bye.
night.
Okay.
Good night. Take care.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.